He was a ruthless loan shark who exploited the poor and left the most vulnerable in fear of their lives. But tonight, John Keeley, known locally as John Boy, is starting a prison sentence.
The 36-year-old used an army of enforcers to make people pay interest of up to 2,500%, and in the process made himself a multi-millionaire. Our reporter Yunus Muller is outside his house now. Yunus?
Unlike many of his victims, John Keeley lived a comfortable lifestyle, even buying his £800,000 house here in Derbyshire by paying in cash. But his multi-million-pound illegal lending business was based on preying on the most vulnerable families in Manchester. One terrified victim from East Manchester now lives in a secret location and can't even contact her own family. Why? Because she borrowed £700 from Keeley to buy her wedding dress.
I've lost everything. I've lost all my family. I've got a son buried up in Manchester. Can't go to the cemetery no more. None of my family know where I live. I can't let them know where I live because I'm too frightened.
Keeley gave his victims money from a roll of £20 notes in the back of his Range Rover. No paperwork and, crucially, no mention of a final figure. But there followed many threats of violence.
I knew that he meant business. He wasn't going to go away. He said he wasn't going to go away. His enforcers said, you're not going to get rid of us that easy. So, I mean, what do you do?
Over a 4.5-year period, he had more than 1,200 customers and made £3 million, charging interest rates of up to 2,500%. Earlier this year, loan shark Paul Nicholson was jailed for blackmailing, assaulting and even raping one of his victims. And there are more loan sharks out there.
We know that credit is difficult to come by at the moment, even more so, than before. But the worst part about this is that they are targeting the most vulnerable members of the community.
Keeley tried to conceal his activities using another legal company, but Judge Adrian Smith described him as a ruthless individual who displayed a high degree of sophistication.
I was absolutely stupid. I just fell in a trap, but once you get a loan off these people, you never get out of it. You might as well say ta-ra to your life, ta-ra to your home, ta-ra to everything, because you never get away from these people.
Tonight, the 36-year-old is beginning a 5-year sentence for offences including blackmail and illegal money lending. John Keeley managed to bypass the financial regulatory system because he targeted those who couldn't get credit, and that is a big problem. But if you speak to his victims, they'll tell you that temptation could ultimately lead to ruin.
Overnight, it's been reported that 2 men were arrested on a transatlantic flight yesterday morning, suspected of planning a terrorist attack.
US officials asked Dutch police to detain the 2 men at Amsterdam's Schiphol airport after they became concerned about mock bombs in their luggage.
Yunus Muller has the details.
Law enforcement officers in the United States have dealt with what they're calling a dry run for a terrorist attack. The men allegedly involved are Ahmed Mohamed Nasser al-Sufi and Hazem al-Murissi. Now, Sufi was stopped at an airport in Alabama where reports suggest that his luggage contained a mobile phone strapped to a medicine bottle along with a number of other phones and luggage, and clearly that was enough to cause concern.
Well, anytime anybody's got a whole bunch of cell phones taped to bottles and triggering devices like digital watches, that sounds per se like something you'd want to know about.
But crucially, no explosives were found and he was allowed to board a flight to Chicago. But once in Chicago, he checked in his luggage to a flight to Yemen. He met up with Murissi and headed from Chicago to Amsterdam. However, once officials discovered that Sufi and his luggage were separated, they contacted Dutch police and both men were arrested. But there remains concern this morning that Sufi had been allowed onto a plane despite security concerns. Nina Cordran could afford to go back to work after Matilda was born because her employer gave her childcare vouchers.
Without them, I think we'd be a bit stuck. Matilda goes to nursery 4 days a week. We don't have the luxury of grandparents living near us to help sort of save on those nursery fees.
Effectively, they are a tax break for working parents and are accepted by registered childcarers from au pairs to nannies.
340,000 parents use them to save up to £2,400 a year.
By scrapping the childcare voucher scheme, the government would divert the money saved into funding nursery places and free childcare for 250,000 two-year-olds.
What's wrong with the decision is the way they've decided to fund it. It's robbing Peter to pay Paul. The money is going to come from another group of parents with children in order to fund that change.
Critics warn it's not higher-rate taxpayers but families with young children who would be the biggest losers. When it comes to driving, our personalities change and we behave in ways we wouldn't otherwise imagine.
The minute some of us get behind a wheel, we become what the study calls a Jekyll and a Hyde characters. 40% of us have a radical personality change. 61% become more aggressive, and almost a third admit to driving faster just to impress others.
Men are the worst and twice as likely to drive dangerously.
I can occasionally be a bit aggressive, I suppose. No different to anyone else.
How would you describe yourself as a driver?
Quite good. Better than my husband.
Well, I can get a bit ratty if they, want to pass me or so.
Some are all right, some are mad.
And here's something else to think about. Motorists are different types. The steady Eddie, the racing driver, the worrier, the snail. But most of us, the vast majority, are down as the conformists. In other words, we tend to blame ourselves for other people's mistakes. The question is, who are you?
I'm the guilty one. That's the problem. I'm being made to feel that way in here right now.